Have you ever found yourself agreeing to something when your deepest instinct was to vehemently refuse? Do you find yourself consistently evading confrontation as if it were a serious offense, or relentlessly pursuing validation as if it were essential for survival? This isn't merely coincidental. It's not an indication of inherent weakness. Instead, it represents a deeply ingrained set of behavioral patterns established long before you possess the cognitive capacity to comprehend the concept of manipulation. And what if I were to reveal to you that some of the most profound anxieties, fundamental desires, and intense emotional responses you experience today did not originate during your adult years? They were, in fact, meticulously shaped and formed during your formative childhood. Within the scope of this particular video segment, we will meticulously dissect and illuminate 10 psychological stratagems that have been subtly or overtly deployed upon you since the nascent stages of your existence. These tactics were not invariably employed with malevolent intent, yet their efficacy in influencing your development remains undeniable. Some of these strategies were imperceptibly subtle in their application, while others were strikingly direct and impactful. However, without exception, each one fundamentally restructured your core identity in ways that you never consciously elected or endorsed. This presentation transcends mere informational dissemination. It constitutes an in-depth psychological excavation, a comprehensive forensic deconstruction of your earliest emotional schematics, drawing extensively upon the foundational tenets of Sigmund Freud's seminal work concerning repression, suggestion, and unconscious association. And once you attain recognition of these pervasive tactics, their influence will become irreversibly evident to you. Let us commence with the initial psychological mechanism. The experience of being disregarded is akin to receiving a direct affirmation of your non-existence. During your childhood, when a significant figure, a parent, an educator, a sibling deliberately withheld affection or attention through silence, you did not acquire the capacity to navigate disagreements constructively. Instead, you assimilated a far more detrimental lesson, that your very being is inherently problematic whenever another individual expresses displeasure. The deliberate application of the silent treatment was not merely an absence of auditory input, it was, in essence, a sophisticated form of psychological warfare. While you lacked the vocabulary to articulate this phenomenon at the time, your nascent nervous system registered its profound impact. And consequently, in your adult life, every instance where someone withdraws, procrastinates in responding, or presents you with that identical, unsettling stillness, your brain instinctively signals an impending threat. You intensify your efforts. You offer apologies, often unwarranted. You compromise your authentic convictions simply to reestablish the severed connection. Freud termed this intricate process a trauma of omission. In scenarios where a child is denied unequivocal clarification and instead receives only emotional coldness, the developing brain autonomously fills these informational voids with an overwhelming sense of culpability. And here lies the enduring detrimental effect. You begin to inextricably link the presence of others with a sense of security in their disapproval with imminent peril. This deeply ingrained association manifests in your adult life through excessive apologies and exhaustive explanations. You tacitly accept silence as a deserved retribution, erroneously believing you have earned such a punitive response. It is not fundamentally a fear of outright rejection that drives you. Rather, it is a profound apprehension of being metaphorically ghosted by individuals whose presence holds significant meaning for you. However, consider this alternative perspective, this crucial reframe. Being subjected to the silent treatment does not inherently signify that you have committed an error. Rather, it frequently indicates that the other individual lacks the requisite emotional tools or communication skills to articulate their feelings effectively. And crucially, that deficiency is not your responsibility to shoulder. What an extraordinarily well-behaved child, they would commend. Yet the unspoken implication of their words was, what a remarkably quiet one. From a very early age, a significant proportion of children are not commended or incentivized for the genuine expression of their authentic selves, but rather for their unwavering adherence to prescribed behaviors and their demonstrable compliance. Remain seated without fidgeting. Refrain from speaking unless directly addressed. Be a good child. However, the definition of good, frequently translated into merely being sufficiently subdued and unobtrusive so as not to disrupt or inconvenience the surrounding adults. And it is precisely at this juncture that Freud's profound theory of repression comes into play with significant explanatory power. When a child internalizes the understanding that the overt expression of their emotions or thoughts invariably leads to punitive consequences or unequivocal disapproval, they do not cease to experience those emotions. Instead, they merely cease to overtly display them. These powerful emotional currents do not simply dissipate into nothingness. Rather, they are driven deep beneath the surface of conscious awareness, descending into what Freud meticulously defined as the unconscious mind. And subsequently, much later in the trajectory of their lives, these repressed emotions resurface and manifest in various forms, including but not limited to debilitating social anxiety, an overwhelming compulsion to engage in people-pleasing behaviors, an acute apprehension of articulating one's genuine opinions, and a perpetual, ingrained necessity to project an agreeable and easygoing demeanor, even when one is experiencing profound internal distress or suffering. This insidious programming effectively conditions you to suppress and diminish your authentic truth for the perceived benefit of maintaining superficial harmony. You develop into an astute practitioner of avoiding any action that might rock the boat, even if, metaphorically speaking, you are slowly succumbing to drowning beneath its placid surface. You force a smile when your deepest impulse is to unleash a scream of frustration. You offer agreement when your true desire is to voice a strong objection, and you subtly diminish your own presence and personality merely to assimilate and fit in with the prevailing social environment. However, here is the unvarnished truth. No one ever explicitly instructed you that being agreeable is synonymous with being genuinely kind. Nor were you taught that maintaining silence is equivalent to possessing true inner strength. There are instances where the most emotionally intelligent and courageous action you can undertake is to declare, with conviction, "I do not concur with that perspective," and then allow the inevitable discomfort that arises from such an assertion to simply exist. Because it is within that very discomfort that genuine personal growth germinates and flourishes. And it is also within that space that your authentic, unvarnished voice can finally emerge. You are causing me immense anguish. After everything I have selflessly done for your benefit, you ought to feel a profound sense of shame. These are not merely innocuous linguistic constructions. They are, in essence, psychological guilt bombs, meticulously devised and strategically deployed upon developing minds with the explicit objective of manipulating their behavior. And predictably, they prove remarkably effective, primarily because, during childhood, your fundamental survival is inextricably linked to the maintenance of secure connections with your caregivers. You are utterly dependent on their provision and emotional support. Consequently, if the perceived cost of receiving love and affirmation is the acceptance of guilt, you will willingly pay that exorbitant price, repeatedly and without hesitation. Freud possessed a keen comprehension of this phenomenon. He designated it as superego conditioning, a process wherein the nascent inner critic is profoundly molded by external expressions of shame and disapproval. Through this mechanism, you internalize the voice of the manipulator, ultimately adopting it as your own internal monologue. Thus, even decades later, when no external agent is actively attempting to induce guilt within you, you find yourself autonomously generating and experiencing self-reproach. You feel a pervasive sense of wrongness for indulging in rest. You perceive yourself as behaving improperly for establishing personal boundaries. You experience guilt, even a sense of selfishness, for prioritizing your own fundamental needs, all because guilt has been transformed into an involuntary reflex, a metaphorical leash cleverly disguised as a moral conscience. However, consider this vital reframing. Guilt is not invariably a reliable moral compass. Sometimes it is merely an echoing reverberation of another individual's unfulfilled expectations. You are not inherently flawed or bent for disappointing individuals whose expectations were, in all likelihood, excessively demanding. You are not behaving incorrectly for requiring personal space and autonomy. You are not being selfish for making the conscious choice to prioritize your own well-being. The true manipulation does not occur when someone employs guilt on a singular occasion. The most profound manipulation transpires when they successfully indoctrinate you to induce guilt within yourself, effectively acting as an extension of their manipulative agenda. And once you achieve this critical insight, you begin to experience a profound sense of liberation. Thus far, we have merely examined three of the intricate emotional stratagems that profoundly influence the trajectory of a lifetime. The pervasive silent treatment, which inadvertently conditioned you to engage in chronic over-apologizing. The system of rewards for being good, which transformed you into an incessant self-editor. And the weaponized deployment of guilt, which ultimately coalesced into your internalized inner critic. However, we are only at the nascent stages of our exploration. In the subsequent section, we will meticulously unveil the tactics that subtly transmute genuine affection into a mechanism of control, transform the pursuit of approval into an inescapable snare, and even pervert the very essence of love into a restrictive leash. And one particular stratagem among them may offer a profound explanation for why you perpetually feel burdened with the responsibility for managing the emotional states of everyone else around you. Prepare yourself. The forthcoming truths are even more weighty and impactful, yet concomitantly, the freedom that inevitably follows their recognition is equally profound. You have most likely encountered it in one manifestation or another. I am exceptionally proud of your accomplishment because you achieved an A grade. Or, you are such an exemplary child when you exhibit appropriate behavior. And consequently, you began to internalize the belief that love is not an inherent entitlement, but rather a commodity that must be arduously earned. Freud posited that one of the most potent and indelible imprints upon a child's unconscious mind is the concept of conditional affection. This deeply ingrained notion suggests that your intrinsic worth is not predicated upon who you fundamentally are, but rather on what you are able to achieve or perform. This extends beyond mere parenting methodologies. It represents a profound form of psychological programming. You subsequently mature into an adult who relentlessly pursues achievement as if it were the very air you breathe. You experience an unsettling hollowness and a pervasive sense of inadequacy whenever you are not actively performing or excelling. You erroneously conflate your productivity with your inherent self-worth. And perhaps most tragically of all, you begin to gravitate towards and actively choose relationships that mirror this identical, conditional dynamic. This might manifest as the supervisor who only offers validation when you consistently exceed expectations, or the romantic partner who becomes emotionally distant and cold unless you are assiduously fulfilling every single one of their needs. It could also be the friend who conspicuously disappears from your life when you find yourself in a position where you have nothing tangible to offer them. But herein lies the true tragedy. You begin to treat yourself in precisely the same manner. You only experience a sense of being enough when you are actively achieving, producing, or performing. You only find respite when exhaustion completely overtakes you. Yet even in that state, a lingering question persists in a corner of your mind. Would I still be cherished if I ceased this relentless self-validation? Sigmund Freud identified this phenomenon as a wound within the superego, that intrinsic voice dictating your self-worth, which is meticulously constructed from the conditional benchmarks set by your primary caregivers. However, an opportunity now presents itself, the choice to prioritize self-love. This isn't a reward reserved for some distant, hypothetical achievement. It's a declaration. I am not here to earn affection through performance. I am here to embody love itself. During your formative years, the adults in your life likely lauded you for being agreeable, pleasant, courteous, and compliant. Conversely, any expression of defiance, anger, or challenge to authority invariably resulted in the withdrawal of that coveted approval. What profound lesson did you absorb from this dynamic? Approval equated to security. Questioning authority signified a threat. Authenticity carried inherent risk. Given the developmental stage of your brain, you lacked the capacity to critically assess these lessons. Instead, you adapted. You cultivated likability. You smiled on demand. You perpetually performed. But the true consequence of this adaptation was far more insidious. You inadvertently constructed a confinement, a psychological cage, fashioned from the very compliments you received. You developed an insatiable craving for others' affirmation, a need as fundamental as the air you breathed. Because when you were favored, it felt indistinguishable from love. When you were praised, it provided a sensation of protection. And when that approval was rescinded, it evoked a primal fear of non-survival. Freud would categorize this as a defense mechanism known as identification. Without conscious awareness, you transformed into the very embodiment of what the external world deemed commendable. Yet this assimilation carried a concealed cost. You began to censor your genuine perspectives to circumvent discord. You sacrificed your fundamental needs to maintain superficial harmony. You uttered yes when your entire being yearned to scream no. And gradually, a crucial aspect of yourself began to erode. Who are you, truly, when no one is observing? This cage, however comfortable it may appear, remains a restrictive enclosure. Approval in this context functions as a potent narcotic, initially sweet, but ultimately capable of stripping you of your very essence if you fail to embrace the mantra. I would rather be disliked for my authentic self than loved for a fabricated persona. For no crescendo of applause can ever mend the profound ache of self-abandonment. This particular realization often strikes a deep chord. Imagine a scenario. One day the adults in your life were affectionate, warm, and effusive with praise. The next they were cold, distant, and irritable. I love you, but why can't you be more like your sibling? You're far too sensitive. Love in this environment became a matter of pure chance, a toss of a coin. You never knew which version of them would materialize. Consequently, you learned to meticulously monitor their emotional states, to remain perpetually vigilant, to anticipate their reactions, and to constantly adjust your behavior. This wasn't nurturing, it was emotional whiplash. Freud theorized this phenomenon as intermittent reinforcement. The unpredictable oscillation between affection and rejection forges an exceptionally powerful psychological bond. Your brain becomes habitually reliant on the mere hope of receiving love, and perhaps more detrimentally, it internalizes blame for the withdrawal of that affection. You might rationalize, perhaps if I just exert more effort, they will love me again. If I simply avoid upsetting them, everything will be fine. It's most likely my fault. This ingrained narrative then shadows you into adulthood. You develop a tolerance for inconsistency. You find yourself pursuing emotionally unavailable individuals. You mistakenly equate dramatic turmoil with passionate connection. You come to perceive love as something inherently unstable, something to be earned, something inherently insecure. But here is the undeniable truth. Genuine love does not vanish simply because you are imperfect. Authentic love is steadfast, not conditional. An affection that fluctuates in accordance with your behavior is not love. It is a sophisticated form of emotional manipulation. You were not inherently difficult. You were merely navigating a tempest that was not of your making. And now you are free from the compulsion to chase emotional hurricanes in order to feel truly alive. Stop crying. It's not that significant. You're being overly dramatic. Each instance where your profound emotions were met with dismissiveness, ridicule, or punitive measures, your emotional regulatory system did not learn to self-soothe. Instead, it learned to self-reject. Freud referred to this as repression. When emotions become too agonizing to articulate, the mind instinctively relegates them to the unconscious realm. However, this does not equate to their disappearance. On the contrary, they seep out in various manifestations: anxiety, erratic mood swings, emotional detachment, or a persistent, unsettling sensation that something is fundamentally amiss within you. For when your feelings were subjected to shame, you absorb that shame as an intrinsic part of yourself. You internalize thoughts like, I weep excessively, I feel too intensely, no one else reacts in this manner. Perhaps I am fundamentally broken. And this deeply held conviction becomes the very filter through which you perceive your own existence. Consequently, you now distrust your own emotional responses. You downplay your suffering. You offer apologies for your tears. You suppress your joy because even that was once deemed too much for someone else. But this is the message you desperately need to internalize. Feeling deeply is not a weakness. It is a testament to the vitality of your emotional system, a sign that it is still actively seeking safe and authentic expression. You are not too much. Rather, they were too limited in their capacity to receive you, and you no longer need to diminish your emotional truth to conform to someone else's comfort parameters. The world is in dire need of individuals who feel wholly and authentically, not those who feel less. Thus far, we have meticulously uncovered 7 psychological mechanisms that have silently and systematically molded your behavior. These are the tricks that instilled in you the habits of excessive apologies, relentless overachievement, stifled emotional expression, and the exhaustive analysis of every scintilla of affection you received. You have likely recognized aspects of yourself in at least one, perhaps even all of these descriptions. However, the final 3 tricks delve into even deeper psychological strata, for they illuminate why so many individuals remain trapped even after years of therapeutic intervention, even after severing detrimental ties, and even after the healing process has seemingly begun. These remaining insights clarify the invisible psychological contracts that continue to operate within your mind, explaining why, at times, you still experience yourself as a frightened child inhabiting an adult body. We will now proceed to meticulously dissect these remaining mechanisms, and in doing so, break their enduring spell. They labeled you the mature one, the helper, the fixer, the peacemaker. But what they truly implied was, we intend to rely heavily on your nervous system because we are incapable of managing our own. Freud designated this phenomenon as parentification. This occurs when a child is prematurely thrust into adult emotional responsibilities. You learn to lend an ear when no one listened to you. You learn to provide care when no one genuinely cared for you. You learn to maintain tranquility in environments saturated with tension that you did not instigate. And while others applauded your precocious maturity, you were inadvertently robbed of your childhood. Now you tend to overfunction in your relationships. You experience guilt when you allow yourself to rest. You collapse from sheer burnout. Yet you mislabel this exhaustion as an indication of strength. But internalize this profound truth. You were not inherently strong. You were sacrificed. That was not genuine responsibility. It was emotional larceny. They did not resort to shouting. They did not physically harm you. Instead, they wielded the weapon of guilt. After everything I do for you, fine, I suppose I just don't matter. Freud would posit that this dynamic fosters internalized shame spirals where guilt, rather than your intrinsic values, becomes your guiding compass. Consequently, you now find yourself apologizing for your very existence. You hesitate to assert boundaries by saying no. You experience feelings of culpability even when your position is objectively correct. This is because, at a fundamental level, love was always inextricably linked to guilt in your early experiences, and you were indoctrinated to conflate genuine concern with manipulation and dominance. Possessing personal boundaries does not equate to selfishness. Rather, it signifies self-respect. You are actively mending that aspect of your being, which erroneously believed that love necessitated the complete effacement of your individuality. You're the introverted one. You bear a striking resemblance to your father. You will never excel at that particular endeavor. Sigmund Freud articulated a warning concerning the pervasive influence of labeling. The identities imposed upon individuals during their formative years frequently crystallize into enduring life narratives. They dictated your perceived identity long before you had the opportunity for self-discovery. Consequently, you continue to bear labels that were never truly congruent, persistently harbor doubts about talents you never ventured to cultivate, and persistently live a circumscribed existence because someone once declared you to be excessively much. However, the fundamental issue was never inherent within you. You served as the receptive canvas for the unaddressed psychological projections of another individual. Their pronouncements did not constitute your authentic truth. Their limitations do not dictate your ultimate destiny. You are fully entitled to undertake a complete redefinition of your own self. Therefore, how profoundly did these deceptive tactics mold your being? Not through conscious volition, but through continuous proximity, through incessant repetition, and through affection inextricably intertwined with obfuscation. Freud posited that the unconscious realm is not a confinement, but rather an entryway. And once the nature of the deception is comprehended, its coercive power dissipates. You are no longer compelled to perpetuate these assigned roles. You are no longer obligated to relentlessly strive for that which was intrinsically yours from the outset. You are no longer required to offer ceaseless apologies for experiencing emotions, for expressing needs, or for asserting your right to decline. You were never too much. You were never fundamentally flawed or damaged. You were merely navigating a systemic construct meticulously designed to induce amnesia regarding your inherent capabilities. But that era has concluded. You are now in a state of remembrance. Should these insights resonate deeply within your core, please extend this information to another individual who remains ensnared within the confines of these antiquated roles. And consider subscribing if you desire further content of this nature. Philosophical discourse, psychological exploration, and authentic truths that genuinely facilitate the unlearning of detrimental patterns. Please leave a comment below. Which manipulative technique did you initially identify? And which one are you now prepared to cease believing in? You are no longer isolated in this experience. Not within this shared space. Have you ever contemplated the underlying reasons why you acquiesce when your true inclination is to vehemently refuse? Why you assiduously evade confrontation as if it were a criminal offense, or relentlessly pursue validation as if it were essential for survival? This behavior is neither arbitrary nor indicative of inherent weakness. It is the culmination of ingrained programming, established long before you possess the cognitive capacity to comprehend the concept of manipulation. And what if I were to disclose that some of your most profound apprehensions, aspirations, and emotional responses in the present day did not originate in your adult life? They were, in fact, meticulously formulated during your childhood. In this forthcoming video segment, we will meticulously examine 10 psychological stratagems that have been employed upon you since your earliest existence. Not invariably with malevolent intent, yet consistently with significant efficacy. Some of these tactics were subtly insidious, while others were overtly sharp, but each of them fundamentally reconfigured your sense of identity in ways you never consciously elected. This is not merely the dissemination of information. This constitutes a profound psychological excavation, a meticulous forensic deconstruction of your earliest emotional schematics. Drawing extensively from Sigmund Freud's seminal work on the mechanisms of repression, suggestion, and unconscious association. And once you attain recognition of these deceptive maneuvers, their pervasive influence will be impossible to disregard. Let us commence with the initial stratagem. The experience of being disregarded is tantamount to being informed of your non-existence. During your childhood, when an authority figure, a parent, an educator, a sibling, deliberately withheld affection or attention through silence, you did not acquire the capacity to navigate disagreement constructively. You assimilated a far more detrimental lesson, that your intrinsic being is the root cause of another's displeasure. The deliberate silent treatment transcended mere quietude. It constituted psychological warfare. While you lacked the lexicon to articulate it at the time, your autonomic nervous system registered its profound impact. And now, every instance when someone withdraws, procrastinates in responding, or bestows upon you that familiar stillness, your brain instinctively signals imminent peril. You intensify your efforts. You offer apologies. You relinquish your authentic self-expression solely to re-establish the connection. Freud characterized this phenomenon as a trauma of omission. When a child is deprived of clarity and instead met with coldness, the brain autonomously fills these cognitive voids with feelings of culpability. And here lies the enduring detrimental consequence. You begin to equate the presence of others with safety and their disapproval with inherent danger. This predisposition manifests in adult life as excessive apologizing. You engage in exhaustive explanations. You passively endure silence as a form of punitive action, mistakenly believing it to be deserved. It is not merely a fear of rejection that afflicts you. Rather, it is a profound apprehension of being metaphorically ghosted by individuals whose significance to you is paramount. However, here is an alternative perspective. Being subjected to the silent treatment does not signify that you have committed an error. It indicates that the other individual was inadequately equipped to engage in effective communication, and that burden is not yours to bear. "What a well-behaved child," they uttered. Yet their implicit meaning was, "What a quiescent one." From a nascent age, a majority of children are commended not for their innate authenticity, but for their docile compliance. Remain seated. Refrain from speaking. Be good. However, good frequently merely denoted being sufficiently subdued so as not to inconvenience the adults. And it is precisely here that Freud's theory of repression becomes acutely relevant. When a child internalizes the notion that expressive behavior elicits punishment or disapproval, they do not cease to experience emotions. They merely cease to overtly display them. The emotions themselves do not dissipate. They recede into the subterranean depths of what Freud termed the unconscious. And subsequently in life, they resurface as manifestations of social anxiety, an ingrained propensity for people-pleasing, a profound reluctance to articulate one's opinions, and an unrelenting compulsion to appear perpetually agreeable, even when experiencing profound inner turmoil. This ingrained programming meticulously trains you to compress your genuine feelings for the perceived sake of maintaining harmony. You evolve into an adept practitioner of avoiding any disruption, even if you are metaphorically submerging beneath the surface. You present a smile when your true desire is to vocalize a scream. You acquiesce when your instinct is to dissent, and you diminish your true self simply to conform. But here is the unvarnished truth. No one ever instructed you that being agreeable is synonymous with being benevolent. Being silent is not equivalent to possessing strength. Occasionally, the most profoundly emotionally intelligent action you can undertake is to assert, "I do not concur with that," and permit the resultant discomfort to manifest, because personal growth resides within that discomfort, and so does the burgeoning of your authentic voice. "You are causing me profound emotional distress. After all my endeavors on your behalf, you ought to feel a deep sense of shame." These are not merely declarative sentences. They are meticulously crafted guilt bombs, strategically deployed upon developing psyches to manipulate overt behavior. And predictably, they prove effective because, as a child, your very survival is contingent upon connection. You are utterly reliant upon your primary caregivers. Therefore, if the price of receiving affection is the experience of guilt, you will willingly pay it repeatedly. Freud possessed a keen understanding of this dynamic. He labeled it superego conditioning. This occurs when the nascent inner critic is sculpted by external expressions of shame, leading you to internalize the voice of the manipulator and adopt it as your own. Consequently, decades later, even in the absence of overt attempts to induce guilt, you self-inflict it. You experience culpability for engaging in rest. You feel a sense of wrongdoing for establishing personal boundaries. You perceive yourself as selfish for prioritizing your own fundamental needs because guilt has metastasized into an automatic reflex, a restrictive leash masquerading as a moral compass. However, here is the transformative perspective. Guilt is not invariably an accurate moral compass. Sometimes it is merely the resonant echo of another individual's unfulfilled expectations. You are not inherently flawed for disappointing those who held unrealistic expectations. You are entirely justified in requiring your personal space. It is not an act of selfishness to prioritize your own well-being. The true essence of manipulation does not lie in an isolated instance of someone invoking guilt. Instead, it manifests when they systematically condition you to inflict guilt upon yourself on their behalf. The moment this realization dawns upon you, a profound sense of liberation begins to unfold. Up to this point, we have merely examined three of the intricate emotional ploys that profoundly shape an individual's entire existence. These include the tactic of the silent treatment, which inadvertently trained you to excessively apologize for perceived missteps; the practice of rewarding good behavior, which transformed you into an incessant self-editor; and the deployment of weaponized guilt, which ultimately solidified into your relentless inner critic. However, our exploration is far from over. In the subsequent segment, we will delve into the deceptive stratagems that transmute genuine affection into a mechanism of control, morph authentic approval into an insidious trap, and even distort the very essence of love into a restrictive leash. Furthermore, one of these forthcoming revelations might precisely illuminate why you continue to bear the burden of responsibility for the emotional states of those around you. Prepare yourself for what lies ahead. The forthcoming revelations are indeed more profound and potentially unsettling, yet the concomitant freedom that invariably follows is equally, if not more, substantial. It is highly probable that you encountered sentiments akin to these in various forms throughout your upbringing. I am immensely proud of you because you achieved an A grade. Or, you are truly a wonderful child when you conduct yourself appropriately. Consequently, you began to internalize the belief that love is not an intrinsic gift, but rather something that must be earned through specific actions or achievements. Sigmund Freud posited that one of the most potent and enduring influences imprinted upon a child's unconscious mind is the concept of conditional affection. This principle suggests that your inherent value and worth are predicated upon your actions and accomplishments, rather than stemming from your fundamental identity as a person. This phenomenon transcends mere parenting. It is, in essence, a form of profound psychological programming. As you mature, you find yourself relentlessly pursuing achievement, much like a fundamental necessity such as oxygen. An unsettling hollowness pervades your being whenever you are not actively performing or accomplishing something. You unwittingly conflate your productivity with your intrinsic self-worth. And perhaps most tragically, you begin to gravitate towards relationships that precisely mirror this dysfunctional dynamic. Consider the employer who only bestows validation upon you when you surpass all expectations, or the romantic partner who becomes emotionally distant and cold unless all their needs are meticulously met by you, or even the friend who vanishes entirely from your life the moment you appear to have nothing tangible to offer them. But here lies the true tragedy. You begin to treat yourself in precisely the same manner. A sense of personal adequacy only surfaces when you are actively achieving. Rest is permitted only after you have reached a state of utter exhaustion or collapse. And yet, a persistent, nagging question lingers within a part of your consciousness. Would they still genuinely love me if I ceased this incessant need to prove myself? Freud conceptualized this as a wound to the superego. The internal voice that fundamentally governs your self-worth is meticulously constructed from the conditional standards and expectations imposed by those who played a pivotal role in your upbringing. However, you now possess the profound capacity to make a conscious choice, to love yourself unconditionally, first and foremost. This self-love is not contingent upon reaching some arbitrary, imagined milestone in the future. It is the assertion, I am not present here to perform in order to earn love. I am present here to embody love itself. During your formative years, the adults in your immediate environment likely showered you with praise for exhibiting traits such as being easy, nice, polite, and obedient. Conversely, every instance in which you expressed defiance, displayed anger, or dared to question authority, that coveted approval was swiftly withdrawn. What, then, was the indelible lesson you absorbed? That approval equates to safety. That questioning established norms or figures of authority represents a threat. And that embracing your authentic self carries an inherent risk. Due to the fact that your brain was still undergoing crucial developmental stages, you lack the cognitive capacity to challenge these deeply ingrained associations. Instead, you adapted. You meticulously cultivated a likable persona. You consistently offered smiles. You performed diligently. But the true consequence of these actions was this. You inadvertently constructed a cage, meticulously fashioned from the very compliments you received. You developed an intense dependency on the approval of others, much in the same way that you required air to breathe. Because when others expressed their liking for you, it imbued you with a sensation akin to love. When they lavished praise upon you, it felt like an impenetrable shield of protection. And when they chose to withhold that approval, it evoked a terrifying sensation, as if your very survival were at stake. Freud would categorize this as a defense mechanism known as identification. You unconsciously assimilated and became the very embodiment of what the external world rewarded. But here lies the concealed cost of this adaptation. You meticulously censor your genuine opinions to assiduously avoid any potential conflict. You systematically betray your own fundamental needs in a relentless pursuit of maintaining peace and harmony. You utter the word yes even when every fiber of your being yearns to scream no. And gradually, imperceptibly, you begin to forget. Who are you truly when no external gaze is upon you? The cage, though seemingly comfortable and familiar, remains unequivocally a cage, and approval in its essence is a potent drug. Initially sweet and intoxicating, it will ultimately strip you of your very soul if you fail to cultivate the strength to declare, I would rather face disapproval for upholding my truth than be cherished for wearing a mask. For no amount of external applause, however thunderous, possesses the power to truly mend the profound anguish of self-abandonment. This particular realization is deeply poignant. One day, the adults who populated your life were warm, openly affectionate, and effusive with their praise. The very next day, they might be cold, emotionally distant, and noticeably irritable. I love you, but why can't you be more like your brother? You are far too sensitive. Love in this context became a precarious coin toss. You could never predict which version of them would manifest. Consequently, you learned to meticulously monitor their fluctuating moods, to remain perpetually vigilant, to anticipate their shifts, and to constantly adjust your own behavior accordingly. This was not genuine parenting. It was, in stark reality, emotional whiplash. Freud theorized this phenomenon as intermittent reinforcement, the unpredictable and inconsistent cycle of receiving affection followed by rejection creates an extraordinarily powerful and deeply entrenched psychological bond. Your brain becomes literally addicted to the elusive hope of receiving love. And even more detrimentally, it places the blame squarely on your shoulders for the withdrawal of that affection. You find yourself thinking, perhaps if I just try a little harder, they will love me again. If I can just avoid upsetting them, everything will be fine. It's most likely my fault. And that deeply ingrained script relentlessly follows you into your adult life. You develop an unsettling tolerance for inconsistency in relationships. You find yourself perpetually pursuing emotionally unavailable individuals. You tragically conflate intense drama with genuine passion. You come to perceive love as an inherently unstable, something that must be constantly earned and fundamentally unsafe. But here is the undeniable truth. True love does not simply vanish the moment you exhibit imperfections. Authentic love is characterized by its consistency, not by conditional requirements. An affection that appears and disappears based on your behavior is not, in fact, love. It is a carefully orchestrated form of emotional manipulation. You were not inherently difficult. You were merely endeavoring to survive an emotional storm that you had no part in creating. And now you are no longer compelled to chase after metaphorical hurricanes in order to feel truly alive. Stop crying. It's not that big of a deal. You're being dramatic. Every single time your profound emotions were met with outright dismissal, cruel mockery, or direct punishment, your intricate emotional system did not learn the vital skill of self-regulation. Instead, it learned the devastating lesson of self-rejection. Freud articulated this process as repression. When emotions become overwhelmingly painful or threatening to express, the mind instinctively shoves them deep into the unconscious realm. However, this does not equate to their complete disappearance. On the contrary, they insidiously seep out through manifestations such as chronic anxiety, unpredictable mood swings, profound emotional numbness, or this pervasive chronic sense that there is fundamentally something wrong with you. Because when your feelings were subjected to shame, you internalized that shame as an intrinsic part of your own being. You thought, I cry too much. I feel too deeply. No one else reacts in this way. Perhaps I am broken. And that deeply ingrained belief, once formed, becomes the pervasive lens through which you perceive your entire self. Consequently, you now lack trust in your own genuine emotional reactions. You systematically minimize your pain. You offer apologies for your tears. You bottle up your joy because even that was deemed too loud or too much for someone else's comfort. But here is what you absolutely need to internalize. Feeling deeply is not, under any circumstances, an indication of weakness. It is a profound sign that your intricate emotional system remains vibrant, alive, and actively searching for safe and authentic expression. You are not too much. They were simply too limited in their capacity to understand or accept, and you have absolutely no obligation to continue diminishing your emotional truth to conform to someone else's restricted comfort zone. The world, in fact, desperately needs more individuals who feel fully and authentically, not fewer. Thus far, we've uncovered 7 distinct psychological maneuvers that have subtly and systematically influenced your behavior patterns. These cunning stratagems instilled in you a tendency to excessively apologize, to relentlessly overachieve, to suppress your true emotions, and to meticulously dissect every single overture of affection you ever received. It's highly probable that you've recognized aspects of yourself within at least one of these descriptions, perhaps even identifying with all of them. However, the final 3 psychological tactics delve into even deeper territory, illuminating precisely why so many individuals remain trapped in detrimental patterns, even after years of therapeutic intervention, even after severing toxic connections, and even after the initial phases of healing have commenced. These particular tricks elucidate the invisible, unspoken agreements that continue to govern your mental landscape, explaining why at times you still experience the sensation of being a frightened child residing within an adult's body. And now we shall meticulously deconstruct these mechanisms, and in doing so, shatter their detrimental influence. They often characterized you as the mature one, the indispensable helper, the perpetual fixer, the indispensable peacemaker. Yet what they were truly communicating was, we intend to burden your nervous system because we are incapable of managing our own emotional complexities. Sigmund Freud termed this phenomenon parentification, when a child is prematurely thrust into adult emotional responsibilities. They learn to attentively listen when no one reciprocated the same courtesy, to offer care when they themselves received none, and to maintain tranquility in environments rife with tension that they had no hand in creating. And while others lauded your apparent maturity, you were simultaneously deprived of a fundamental childhood experience. Consequently, you now exhibit over-functioning behaviors in your relationships. You experience guilt whenever you allow yourself to rest. You succumb to the debilitating effects of burnout. And then, paradoxically, you mislabel this exhaustion as strength. But listen closely to this crucial insight. You were not inherently strong. Rather, you were sacrificed. That wasn't genuine responsibility. It was, in essence, emotional pilfering. They never resorted to shouting. They never resorted to physical violence. Instead, they employed the insidious tactic of guilt tripping. Phrases like, after everything I do for you, or, fine, I suppose I just don't matter, became their weapons. Freud would contend that this fosters the creation of internalized shame loops, where guilt, rather than your intrinsic values, becomes your primary moral compass. As a result, you now find yourself apologizing for your very existence. You hesitate to assert your boundaries by saying no, and you even feel a sense of wrongdoing even when you are demonstrably correct. This stems from a deeply ingrained belief that, at its core, love was inextricably linked to guilt, and you were conditioned to conflate control with genuine care. It is not selfish to establish personal boundaries. Rather, you are actively healing the part of you that erroneously believed love necessitated self-annihilation. You're the shy one. You're just like your father. You'll never be proficient at that. Freud cautioned against the profound impact of the labeling effect. Identities arbitrarily imposed during childhood frequently evolve into lifelong narratives. They dictated who you were destined to be before you ever had the opportunity to discover your true self. And even now, you continue to bear labels that have never genuinely suited you. You still harbor doubts about talents you never dared to explore, and you persist in living a diminished life simply because someone once declared you to be too much. However, you were never the inherent problem. You served merely as the projection screen for someone else's unresolved psychological issues. Their pronouncements were not your truth. Their limitations are not your predetermined destiny. You are unequivocally entitled to redefine your own identity. So, how many of these intricate psychological maneuvers have shaped your trajectory? Not by deliberate choice, but by mere proximity, by persistent repetition, and by a form of love often shrouded in confusion. Freud firmly believed that the unconscious mind is not a confining prison. Rather, it functions as an accessible door. And once you perceive the underlying trick, the enchantment is irrevocably broken. Now, you are no longer compelled to perpetually enact preassigned roles. You are no longer obligated to continually strive for what was inherently yours from the very beginning. You are no longer required to incessantly apologize for experiencing emotions, for having needs, or for asserting your right to say no. You were never excessive, nor were you ever flawed. You were simply navigating a system meticulously designed to make you oblivious to your inherent power. But that era has ended. You now remember. If this resonated deeply within you, please share it with another individual who might still be ensnared in one of these antiquated roles. And consider subscribing if you desire more content of this nature. Philosophy, psychology, and unvarnished truth that genuinely assists you in unlearning the very things that cause you harm. Please leave a comment. Which specific trick did you identify first? And which one are you now prepared to cease believing? You are no longer isolated, not here in this space.